Welcome to the Real Python Podcast. This is episode 69. Do you wonder what the future may hold for the Python language? Are there speed improvements coming soon? What if you could be in the room while the core developers discuss Python's future? This week on the show, we have Joanna Jablonski, who was invited to the Python Language Summit 2021 as a journalist to summarize and document the event. A small group of core developers from the Python community gather to work toward a healthy future for the language. Through presentations and group discussions, they share insights, ideas, and potential problems. Joanna has been the executive editor at Real Python, and she was invited to write a series of blog posts for the Python Software Foundation that summarize the presentations and deeper conversations of the summit. We walk through the 2 days and discuss the topics covered. Several of the presentations focused on performance and speeding up CPython, and there were also conversations about packaging, documentation, the standard library, handling exceptions, testing, and much more. This episode is brought to you by Sentry, helping developers see issues that matter, solve those issues in minutes, and learn insights to keep their applications running at peak performance. All right, let's get started. The Real Python Podcast is a weekly conversation about using Python in the real world. My name is Christopher Bailey, your host. Each week, we feature interviews with experts in the community and discussions about the topics, articles, and courses found at realpython.com. After the podcast, join us and learn real-world Python skills with a community of experts at realpython.com. Hey, Joanna, welcome back to the show.
Hi, Chris. Thank you.
All right. So you had a really kind of a fun experience in the last couple months here of attending the Python Language Summit for 2021. And can you tell me a little bit about not only your attendance of it, but the series of articles you've written about it?
Sure thing. So I should probably start by explaining what the Python Language Summit is. It's a 2-day event that happens every year in the lead up to PyCon US. And normally it would just sort of be wrapped into all the events around the conference. But this year, since everything was remote again, we just had it over video conference. But one perk of that was that more people were able to attend than would otherwise possibly be limited by time zones or travel or all that kind of thing. The general idea is that it's you're supposed to get a whole bunch of core developers from different Python implementations together, and they give presentations to each other and have discussions and generally bounce ideas around in order to help Python flourish as a language, but also help the Python community flourish. And it's a closed event. Generally, PyCon, in theory, anyone could go. But for the Language Summit, you actually had to apply. And it would be fascinating to just come and spectate. I would imagine tons of people would want to just come and sit in on this and be a fly on the wall. But the general idea is that they don't really... if you're coming, you kind of should be presenting.
Right.
It might be a little bit fuzzy, but, it's not just a fully open thing, which means that, plenty of people probably have FOMO because they didn't get to go to the Language Summit. And, we want to keep, Python is open source, openness is kind of a theme. And so it's really useful just to make sure that the rest of the community still has access to what happened at this event, since, it's about the future of Python. And so every year, the Python Software Foundation gets a journalist to attend the event and write up blog posts about all of the talks that were given and then post them on the PSF blog. So if you want to check out what happened at the summit, go to the PSF blog. I posted all of the articles between May and June.
Yeah.
They're all there. Dig into them and just keep the conversations going, right? Because they're talking about PEPs, they're talking about ideas, they're talking about community initiatives, they're talking about all kinds of cool stuff. And we want people to get involved and be leaders in the Python community. And, I love the Python community, clearly. And this is part of what I think Python is doing fantastically well.
Yeah, and I'll include links for all the different posts also so that people can kind of dive into them and navigate through them. But I think it's going to be a great resource for everybody, again, who wasn't able to attend, and maybe minimize their FOMO.
Yeah.
In general, this is the main way that those talks then would be shared.
Yeah, it's the only way that they're going to be shared. I mean, I suppose speakers can still like share their slides, and it's not as if like they signed an NDA or anything like that. But
Right.
there aren't recordings of the talks that are publicly available or anything like that. Like this, the blog posts are pretty much it. Fortunately, I was able to work from recordings to write the articles this year.
I was wondering about that.
Yeah, that was hugely helpful in past years, or I think last year. The journalist did work from recordings because it was on video conference, or at least I think he did. I assume he did.
Okay.
In the context. But yeah, otherwise, it's just in previous years before that, it's kind of more challenging journalism because you show up and you have you try to record the audio and you take some photos of the projection and,
right.
A hope for the best, I think. So I did appreciate that I had videos to work from, and I do think it helped me do a better job.
Yeah, I could imagine that in person, it might be a bit more distracting.
Yeah.
But I guess maybe one thing that would have been nice for the attendees of this specifically is like their own little hallway track of a sort. But
yeah, I mean, I assume that would have definitely been interesting, but maybe there could also be privacy concerns, or maybe some people having it be a closed event might feel more comfortable with that. So it's can be a bit of a mixed bag either way. But this seems like a reasonable kind of midway point compromise, and I hope that people get something out of these articles and can sort of feel like they were there under the circumstances.
Yeah, in general, you had to summarize them quite a bit, kind of narrow them down. I'm not sure how long each one of these presentations was, but were there certain tricks that you had for summarizing them?
Yeah, so my general goal was to get each article between 500 words and 1,000 words.
Okay.
It was not always successful with that. I think the one on, was it Zach Hatfield Dodd's talk on fuzzing and testing Python with properties. That one I definitely did end up having to go over on because it was hard to condense because it was so focused on examples. And in order to really, it was incredibly useful. And I think if you read the article, you're going to get pretty close to the experience of the talk because I still manage to get the code examples in and he walks you through the different use cases and things. But that one was quite hard to condense. Others definitely felt like there were so many details that I kind of had to include all of them or none of them in order to feel balanced, and just generally trying to think right for your audience, who is this article for? Do they necessarily care about this tangent? How much do we need to go into explaining particular concepts or terminology?
Yeah, I was going to ask about that too.
Exactly. Yeah. Because I definitely learned a lot, let me put it that way, by listening to those talks.
I feel like that's one of those things that, and one of the intents that I have for, having this conversation with you, is the goal of the podcast generally is to help, beginner and intermediate sort of Python people, and, also have interest for advanced people that want to keep growing and keep learning. It's here's a treasure trove of things that are happening inside of the Python language itself. And there is a real variety of sort of topics of development under it, and they're all pretty advanced.
Yeah.
And so in general, how familiar were you with the terms that were being used in some cases?
I mean, I was familiar with some of them, but I remember particularly when I was doing the write-up for Mark Shannon's talk on tiers of execution, I ended up having to do a lot of research. And in the end, when I look at what I wrote, I'm I'm not entirely sure I did this justice, but
that's got to be hard.
Yeah. But I mean, I definitely learned some things, and I feel like everything is always learning anyway. I do find it really reassuring when I hear from other people who I, look up to and see as a lot more advanced than myself that no, they similarly are always learning, and they have to keep learning in order for them to be in the sort of positions that I end up looking up to them about.
Yeah.
And so I do find it reassuring to kind of look behind the curtain and be oh no, we're all just looking stuff up. Well, no, really, we're all stuck in a loop of looking up terms we don't know. It's fine.
you were using that term of like, always having to keep learning and keep moving and so forth. It's like sort of this educational shark kind of thing.
Yeah, educational treadmill. I don't know.
Yeah, whatever. You just got to keep moving.
We need to come up with a metaphor, I think, that feels more fulfilling, though, because otherwise, I don't know. Well, curiosity. I don't know. Maybe curiosity.
Yeah, that is part of it. Yeah, exactly. It's pretty vast, just even the number of posts that you wrote. And so we're not going to be able to dive too deep on each, but at least maybe we could touch on them. And I think what's nice is you start off with just a 2020 Python Language Summit post that has them all listed of day 1 and day 2, and then the topic, and then who was speaking. Like, who's hosting it this time?
So it was hosted by Marietta Wijaya and Łukasz Langa, and they did a fantastic job of just like organizing the whole thing and hosting it. And it felt like almost as good as a in-person event. And it's emceeing for that kind of thing is a challenging thing to pull off. And I think that they did a fantastic job. It definitely had a strong community feel. I felt like I was sitting in on a family reunion, even though we were all just sitting in front of our cameras.
So kind of a similar trend, to PyCon itself. Were there time for question and answer after the talks?
Yes. I mean, not during the lightning talks. Then we pretty much just needed to zoom from one talk to the other. And then, there was maybe some point of contact given to if you want to talk more about this, here's what you can do. But otherwise, yeah, there were always bits of time to ask and answer questions after the talks. And there were some pretty interesting discussions. I wasn't able to include all of them.
Yeah.
Just because I figured it seemed more important to talk about the meat of the talk and maybe weave in a little bit of the conversation just with a limited word count. But yeah, there were some lively discussions. The one about Linux distributions was, I don't know how to describe it, but
contentious?
Yeah, no, not contentious. It was just I could feel the emotional investment in it.
Yeah,
it was just
okay.
It felt personal, that kind of discussion. And
yeah, that sort of charged it up in a way.
Yeah, a little bit. Well, just kind of with the history and communication stuff. And
yeah.
But yeah, generally the conversations were quite good. They were useful. I found that there were often very clear movements towards actually getting something done during the discussions. Here are the next steps. We don't want this person to come back again next year and have to give the same presentation again. What are we going to do? Someone put a post up, we're getting it done. And just a very proactive community collaborative feel. I didn't at any point feel like people were at loggerheads. It seemed like a very nice collaborative kind of environment.
That's good. Awesome. Do you want to dive in? Do you have a particular notes you want to follow?
Well, I'm happy to go in the order that they went in.
Okay, cool.
The first talk was called PEP 654, Exception Groups and Accept Star. It was given by Irit Katriel, Yuri Selivanov, and Guido van Rossum. And PEP 654 was at the draft stage when the talk was given. I assume it still is, but I have not double-checked since. The basic idea is that they want to help users handle unrelated exceptions, because right now, if you're trying to deal with multiple exceptions at the same time, you do have some options, but they're not great.
Okay.
Because if you have multiple unrelated exceptions and you raise the first one and throw away the others, then you're losing exceptions.
Yeah.
But then if you return just a list for the exceptions instead of raising them, then you just have error codes, so you can't do exception handling. And then if you wrap the list of exceptions in a wrapper exception, then again, you just have a list of error codes, so you have the same problem. And the article is one that I think it also does a pretty good job of summarizing it. There's diagrams, there's code blocks. They go into details how do we deal with the metadata? What ideas are we considering? Which ones are we thinking, maybe not? But anyway, the basic idea for this PEP is that they're proposing a new built-in exception type that wraps other exceptions and new syntax with accept star to handle exception groups. But check out the blog post for more detailed explanation than that.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting that you would group things together that in a way to kind of handle them, and then how do you split them up? And again, that there's like a relationship of like, what's the root exception and then the children underneath it. And so I think it leads into like some of the other ones that were coming up too, because I think their exceptions can be a cause for some, not only, your program stopping potentially, but also like just like figuring out how to handle them can be a huge amount of time as far as the processing. Yeah. So.
Yeah. And there were a number of talks that sort of ended up tying into each other. Like Guido's talk about performance came right after Dino's talk about performance. And the discussions kind of ended up overlapping there. Or the stuff that Luciano Ramallo was talking about sort of ended up coming up in different areas, just the whole idea of like a core user. Anyway, we'll get to that later.
Yeah, no, it's cool. It seems like there's, a lot of these things where there's an overall sense that things are moving in a particular direction and ideas are like minds are thinking of these same problems in different ways, which is cool.
Yeah, it feels like progress and like things get done and like collaborativeness and cross-pollination and all that good stuff.
This episode is brought to you by Sentry, helping developers see issues that matter, solve those issues in minutes, and learn insights to keep their applications running at peak performance. What can you expect from Sentry? You get actionable insights and full context so you can fix your app's errors and optimize its performance. You get performance monitoring. Engineering managers and developers now have a single tool to trace Python performance issues back to poor performing API calls, as well as surface all related code errors. And with Sentry's error monitoring, you can understand the important events that led to each Python exception, be it SQL queries, debug logs, network requests, or past errors. Spend less time fixing bugs and more time building features. You can learn more at sentry.io/for/Python, or you can click the link in the show notes. So what do you got next?
Next one was called Progress on Running Multiple Python Interpreters in Parallel in the Same Process. That was by Victor Stinner and Dong-Hee Na. And the changes that they're proposing could be useful to people if you want to work with embedded Python or run multiple interpreters in parallel. Because having everything be in the same process could be more efficient. Like if your admin tools or APIs are designed to handle a single process rather than multiple. And they also mentioned that on Windows, creating a thread is faster than creating a process, and that on Mac OS, they decided to ban forks, so multiprocessing uses spawn by default and is slower. There's more details in the blog post.
Yeah.
As usual.
It's pretty another deep one.
Yeah. There's for a few of them, there's also, I ended up having like one screenshot for like, here's the performance numbers. I'm not just going to like, what you want is the screenshot. I'm just not going to just write a list about it. So check that out. And I will keep pointing people to the blog posts for all of these.
So the next one is, I think what you're talking about, Dino's one.
Yes. Okay. This one was very cool because, well, it was cool for a number of reasons. And also just because performance is the thing that everyone is talking about. But the article about this talk was the first public mention of Pyro, Pyro, which is an experimental implementation of Python at Instagram. And so like there was like sort of kind of like real breaking news on the PSF blog because of this, because he ended up mentioning it, even though mostly he was talking about Cinder.
Yeah. Okay.
So that's Instagram's internal performance-oriented production version of CPython 3.8. Has a lot of performance optimizations, bytecode, inline caching, and eager evaluation of coroutines, a method at a time JIT, and an experimental bytecode compiler that uses type annotations to emit type-specialized bytecode that performs better than the JIT. And it's all open source, so you can check it out. It's at github.com/Facebook-incubator/Cinder. And yeah, check it out.
So just as a brief aside, so something that is a JIT, a just-in-time compiler, is that the terminology? Am I getting that right?
Yes. Yeah.
And in the case of an app that's running on like a mobile app like Instagram, that could be a huge performance boost.
I think so. Yeah, like that's the impression I get. A lot of this kind of terminology and concepts, I kind of end up learning it when I need it, and then I find that I have to keep learning it again because I haven't had to use the information in like a month or something.
Yeah.
But yeah, this is definitely an example of times when I was learning more by listening to the talks and writing and researching to write them, because another thing is also just like balancing how do you express these ideas, and how do you express them so that it's correct, and how do you express them so they sound correct. And I ended up going on this whole rabbit hole of like, okay, so technically like jit means this, but it's also used as a verb, and like I ended up going down this whole rabbit hole of how, like, what is the correct way of expressing it as a verb. Like, this is not the point, no one cares.
Yeah.
Sure. Like, yes, the past form of it is like jat, that's fine.
Weird. All right.
Yeah.
And then that led right into Guido's talk about CPython becoming faster.
This one's very cool. So the basic idea here is that Microsoft is going to be funding a small team to make CPython faster. At the time of the language summit, the team was just Guido, Mark Shannon, and Eric Snow, but I feel like I saw Brett Cannon post the job ad for this. I don't know. Yeah, okay, so that was what that was, right?
I'm not sure. There was basically, and I have to find out more about it, but I know Guido was posting them looking for a lead, basically, someone to basically be the manager of the project per se. I guess maybe a PM, project manager, versus another engineer. Obviously, there's like a pretty detailed list of requirements, but it was pretty cool.
Yeah, because I remember, after the language summit, seeing that job ad, and because Brett Cannon had specifically mentioned like, don't let imposter syndrome because of who's on the team get in the way, and I was like, oh, I think I know what this is. Yeah. But yeah, so they're gonna be presumably looking for other people to join this team, and the collaboration with CPython core developers is going to be super open, and they're going to keep like the repos open and keep all the discussions in trackers and open repos. And yeah, the theme is openness.
Yeah, so like it starts off with like, I don't know, it was Mark Shannon was sharing his plan.
Yes, he had a plan, but he was like, I will not tell you until there is funding. Yeah.
Which is crazy. Yeah. And he was like, I think that we can over 5 times faster in 4 years, which is nuts.
That's some bananas numbers. Yeah.
That's really...
I mean, the question is like, what is possible? Check out the article, of course, but it was definitely I don't have the full context to understand how bananas those numbers are, but when I read them, I was like, this is bananas.
Yeah.
That's bananas.
Yeah. Well, I like you broke it down with the section of like, okay, well, how they would break it faster, and then who would actually benefit from it.
Yeah.
Which is good. So
there was I saw some people kind of joking around on Twitter that in the list of people who won't benefit of like is people who need to improve their code. Like their code is slow enough as it is, which I think caused some laughs on Twitter.
Yeah.
But yeah.
What was the next one?
Next one was by Antonio Cuni. It's called HPy Present and Future. He also talked about this at the 2020 Language Summit. So this year was, just giving an update on how things have progressed with the project. And it is an alternative API for writing C extensions, because the current Python C API shows the implementation details, but HPy hides them, that would otherwise be exposed. And I mean, again, more details in the article, but one thing that stood out was that he asked the CPython devs at the summit if it would be possible to make HPy a semi-official API in the future with first-class support for importing modules and distributing wheels. And some of the people who heard the talk suggested writing a PEP to make that happen. So maybe that will happen.
Is there a significance to the letter HPy?
I feel like I knew this before. Was it? I think I'm mixing things. Part of me wants to say hypothesis, but I don't remember if I'm mixing this up with another talk. Because I remember I went on a bit of a rabbit hole, and I was checking out their site and reading their blog. And incidentally, sideline, it sounds like they're also open to designers to help them with their site.
Okay.
Just in case people are looking to contribute in that way. But yes, the H in HPy stands for handle.
Okay.
That's what it is. So here we are live, being people who look stuff up.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. There are a lot of talks. That was the 5th one. We have a ways to go.
Yeah. All right. Let's keep rolling.
I keep rolling. Okay. So we just reached the end of day 1 because...
Oh, lightning talks.
Yes, lightning talks. Both days ended with a series of lightning talks. A bunch of people just, gave short 5-minute long talks. And the first day was a little lighter on the lightning. We had Petter Victorin, Lorena Messa, and Scott Shawcroft. And first one was from Petter, the stable ABI and limited C API. It's a way to compile a C extension on Python 3.x and run it on Python 3.x plus. And PEP 384 introduced it in 2009. You can use it to simplify extension maintenance, and it can help you support more versions. He'd like to see it used for bindings and embeddings. It does have lower performance and can't do everything that you could do with the full API, but anyway, check it out. And second one was Lorena Messa. She's an absolute powerhouse. In addition to everything else she does, she's also involved with PyLadies.
Yeah.
So she talked about promoting PyLadies and CPython development. And if you're not familiar with PyLadies, it's an international mentorship group to help women be active in the Python community. And they've had a lot of growth internationally in the last while. And so they're trying to help chapters better support their members so that they can actually deliver on the mandate of helping these people actually, what does it mean to be a leader? What do you do?
Yeah, that makes sense.
And so, how do you start contributing? How do you keep contributing? Incidentally, Real Python has a handy article on how to start contributing to Python if you haven't started yet. It's for complete beginners. So if you want to start contributing, check it out on Real Python. But anyway, so they've seen a lot of growth internationally and they want to actually support their members. So they're going to come up with some kind of centralized mandate and global governance model. And it sounds like they're going to try running it like an open source project, but I'm not entirely clear on the details of what that means exactly. But from what I understand, they are also, or at least were also looking for people to help provide some resources to basically help people get started contributing, whether that means doing a screen recording or having something to put on their YouTube channel or something like that. So
yeah, cool.
Yeah. And the last one from the first round of lightning talks was by Scott Shawcroft from CircuitPython. He gave the talk CircuitPython, a subset of CPython, and it is a much smaller version of Python that runs on microcontrollers. Basically, he did a lot of comparing the nuts and bolts of what's included in CircuitPython and comparing it to what's included in CPython.
Yeah, I like that. The size comparison is pretty big difference. Yeah.
Yeah. In the actual talks, he gave more specific examples, like this specific thing is included or whatever. But it just generally gave a sense of what is actually central to Python users' experience of Python. Just the whole, there can be aspects of Python that aren't core Python that people still feel like is Python. People feel like NumPy is Python, but, that kind of thing. And so it just this kind of ties into the talk about what is the standard library.
I was thinking that because we kind of talked about that when Brett was on the show. And I've been playing in CircuitPython a bit with a couple projects. And that was one of the things I noticed right away. It's okay, if I want to do, go down a specific, in this case, hardware route of I want to have this device act like it's a USB interface kind of thing, where it's going to be acting like a keyboard. Well, I need to import those little pieces because they're not included by default, which makes sense. For certain projects, you're not going to need that, and you're going to need to keep things lightweight. That was a little bit of a journey, trying to find out, okay, well, where is all of that? How do I download it? And it's it's not quite as simple as something being able to be just import math, and it's ready to go, so that's definitely a little extra step in something like that.
Yeah. It's definitely sort of like a perspective shift too, where it's just like, oh, maybe we don't have to maintain all of this stuff as core, right? Like
True.
There's a huge maintenance cost too. Anyway, I'm going to try to not veer in too much into my own personal thoughts on this and represent. Yeah, good point. But yeah, journalism is attempting to report what happened.
And then we can discuss what we think from there.
Yes.
Cool. So then how many hours was that? Like,
oh my gosh. Okay. I mean, granted, there weren't just the talks. There were also just lovely like family reunion chatting times, which were quite fun. Like it took a while before the talks actually happened because everyone's just kind of like slowly rocking up and be like, hey, you should come visit, which was nice. And then, just we had to have breaks because I definitely had some serious brain melt going on.
Right.
Like, again, another reason why I was very happy to have the videos to work from, because I was like, yeah, I am learning.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. Some of it was fairly dense, but yeah, there was lots of just like lunch breaks and people chatting, and some people have their cameras on and some people don't, and people are just having a family reunion seems like the closest comparison that I can think to bring in there. So yeah, nice.
This week, I want to shine a spotlight on another Real Python video course. It's about a topic you work with every time you use Python. It's titled Defining and Calling Python Functions. The course is based on a Real Python article by John Sturtz, and in the video course, Howard Francis takes you through how functions work in Python and why they're beneficial, how to define and call your own Python functions, mechanisms for passing arguments to your functions, which include the differences of how to work with positional arguments, keyword arguments, default parameters, forcing positional only or keyword only arguments, tuple packing and unpacking, and the ways to return data from your function back to the calling environment. If you use Python, you have undoubtedly worked with functions, but do you really know the complexities of how to define your own functions and use arguments effectively? I think it's a worthy investment in your time to learn the nitty-gritty details of working with functions. It'll help you understand the code you encounter out there in the wild and help you write more effective functions on your Python journey. Real Python video courses are broken into easily consumable sections, and where needed, include code examples for the techniques shown. All lessons have a transcript, including closed captions. Check out the video course. You can find the link in the show notes, or you can find it using the newly enhanced search tool on realpython.com.
Dig into day 2.
Yeah, start with day 2.
All right. So here we go. Oh, this was the Linux one. It was by Matthias Klose. Basically talked about CPython sources and how they fit in with Debian and Ubuntu and who owns module installations and just like support for various platforms and what inclusiveness can mean if Python is so ubiquitous. Kind of like some of the more challenging communication issues that have problems so far. And one of the, I actually do remember a little bit of the discussion that happened afterwards. And I did try to weave it into the article a little bit because I think it was Carol Willing who just brought up the sort of dichotomy that appears to come up between users and developers. Like, this is a user, this is a developer, but there could be people who are perfectly competent and knowledgeable, but like they're just having a hard time getting this set up. And so like the line isn't necessarily super clear. It's not like these are not two discrete groups.
Yeah, especially with something like Linux, because it's kind of this weird small operating system which it can be used in a lot of other types of devices, or in things like containers, like Docker, or again, we talked about CircuitPython, but like Internet of Things kind of devices, or other smaller computers, or servers and things like that. So I can see that landscape is really crazy, and then there's a lot of like probably background stuff with just the number of times that Python 2 is mentioned in this particular post alone is definitely going to be contention, since that it's over a year and a half now that Python 2 was deprecated.
Yeah. I would describe it as varied.
Okay.
Let's put it that way. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's good to be talking about it. I think it's better to be talking about it than not talking about it. So.
Yeah, I could see that shift, being difficult in a lot of ways, not from an opinion way, but just being like as a process, like how do we get there? And then there's so many versions of
it's complicated
of those operating systems with Debian and Ubuntu, like what it was like 21.04, so there's already like how many revisions are there and so forth. So I definitely something to pay attention to, and it's one I'm going to have to dive into a little bit deeper because I've been playing around a little bit more with that, and I got a new Raspberry Pi, the 400, the all-in-one keyboard thing, and so
cool.
Again, needing to pick what version of Linux is going to run on that, and so forth, and it's definitely a different process of getting Python just even up to date and current and so forth on a Linux distribution.
Actually, this actually does end up also tying in with Luciano's talk, although I didn't end up including this in the article just because I was trying to keep it short. But similar problems there where it's just like, I'm just trying to get this set up. There's something about drivers. I'm trying to, oh wait, no, I guess I'll never get this set up because the person I asked is just like, no, yes, that's the correct thing because it's suboptimal. No, I'm just trying to get it set up. Anyway, so yeah, core users. We'll get back to core users. But in the meantime, the next article was on my favorite topic.
I was thinking that.
Yes. I'm so excited. I've already started getting involved with the editorial board, and I'm delighted. This is delicious. But yeah, I should actually start talking about the topic. Okay. It's the Python documentation work group. And this is not the first time we have had a presentation about the work group at a language summit, because there was also one last year. But this year, Carol Willing and Marietta Wijaya came back to talk about it again. And basically, the idea is that they want to bring together core developers, documentarians, and educators so we can have better documentation that serves the needs of the broader community more effectively, because most people aren't core developers. We need to have a variety of perspectives. We need to have more stuff, like people who are learning, and, try to modernize the documentation theme so that they'll be responsive on mobile, because plenty of people are working with limited bandwidth. And it's a very interesting problem to be like, what are the learning needs? What are the actual, context needs rather than just straight up learning needs? And it's not going to be too disruptive. It's not going to be tearing up everything that's already there, but coming up with new stuff that meets the needs that people have. So
that's good.
Yeah. Python already has great docs compared to a lot of other stuff, but I'm excited at the prospect of it being even better, especially since it's so often positioned as a learning language.
Yeah.
I think this should be really useful.
Yeah. And that's another trend that I've been noticing. Just, I keep referencing that in a lot of the episodes that we've been having, where it's and we just talked about func tools last week, and the documentation for it is pretty great, as far as going into it. In some ways I was I prefer what's written here over sometimes what's written in the article, and it avoids, what we've already talked about, the opinion part of it, per se. And so that's can be handy too, to kind of have something that's really more just its goal is to teach you what's going on inside of it. And also I find it succinct, in a lot of cases, which is really good too. It's not trying to go too deep. So any improvements are welcome, but it's, I'm looking forward to see what happens. And are you going to be involved in that a little bit? Are you hoping to?
Yes. Yeah. I'm getting involved with the editorial board.
Great.
And I am delighted. So that is very cool. Once we start talking about documentation, I will not stop. I will just be okay, here's the deal. If your documentation sucks, no one will know that your project doesn't. Let's sit down.
Yeah.
I have to hold back a little bit.
Understood.
Yeah. But it's cool.
Yeah.
All right, next up is Brett Cannon with What is the Standard Library? Again, this one was pretty much had the opposite energy of the one that I was just projecting with documentation, which is more just a bit more open and like kind of proposing ideas and saying like, is it time for us to write a PEP about what the standard library should be? But again, like none of this was making grand declarations. It's all just like, let's talk about this.
Yeah.
Because there are a lot of opinions on the standard library. It could be useful to come to some kind of agreement. Like, what should it be? Like, how can we best manage it? What should it focus on? Like, how can we decide what should be in it, what shouldn't be in it? Because it's huge.
Yeah. He talked about it a little bit in our episode together, and it was very interesting to hear his opinion and his take on it. And kind of go, like you said, building off of the CircuitPython conversation, they were able to, in a way, create a subset. And that works. And that feels like Python. It's still, Yeah, it's, it does have that same look and feel, which is really nice. And, he highlights here, as he started to highlight a little bit in our talk, there are, these modules that are not even used in a huge number of projects. And so there's a maintenance cost to like making sure those things work. And that part I think is really, the huge thing. And it's like, could this be a standalone thing, and could it be moved over? And I think it makes sense. Like, what was the size difference? It was like 63 megabytes or something like that, versus like kilobytes.
Off the top of my head, I don't remember, but it was massive. Yeah.
And especially when he was proposing through his Unraveling series, the move to potentially try to get like a WebAssembly thing happening, it would really be helpful if it was smaller. So like, what's the core?
Yeah. And so basically it could help to be
organized,
or I don't. Organized might not be the best word there.
I don't know if we want to use it.
But, it sounds like there's a strong value judgment. I take that back.
Yeah, I think of that TV show. I don't know if you've watched Loki at all, but they have this.
I haven't yet. No.
There's this term of pruning.
Oh yeah. See, again, I definitely should know better than to use such loaded words, but I also realize that quite often in these contexts, people put a lot less care into the words that they choose. And so I'm like, okay, these are the words. Yeah.
Like you said, there's a maintenance cost to keeping, the size of certain things. And I think it's definitely something that should be revisited. So that'd be cool if they bring it through the PEP method.
Get people's...
Get the conversation rolling
on the whole deal.
Cool.
Yeah.
So,
and speaking of conversation and communication, this does lead beautifully into the next one. Again, like this is another sort of pair of talks that sort of led into each other nicely. Eric Snow talked about what I should work on as a core dev. And basically, like people come in, they work on whatever they find interesting or whatever is personally relevant to them. And then they're here, and core developers might be wanting to work on the thing that they think is going to be the most impactful.
Right.
But it's hard for individuals to see the bigger picture. And so he's like, what if we had a program manager who could come in, assess the needs of the community, like give us some direction, which, could also provide some direction for the steering council when they work on the roadmap, and just generally facilitate collaboration. And so
I wondered in some ways where they were trying to get a full-time employee, if that would be part of it, but I don't think it was as a project manager per se, but I think the continuity of a full-time person could provide some of what they're looking for. But maybe the suggestion would be to, add a second person that does that. I don't know.
I don't know.
And that's a whole funding thing too. So
funding as a whole, obviously the discussion immediately veered towards funding, but like on the face of it, I'm just like, sure. I am not equipped to, make these decisions, and fortunately, I don't need to have an opinion on them, which is fine. But it would help potentially bring some cohesion. Like, I don't know. And again, I'm using very loaded words. I don't need to be used. I love Python in the community. It sounds like I'm describing it like a disorganized thing. But anyway, it was an interesting concept. We'll see.
Well, I'm glad they're talking about these things too, right?
Yeah.
As opposed to like, letting it sit there. And then I feel like as the language grows, there's going to be more people that are interested in contributing. And so that seems like a really good talk for that. And, our book is maybe helping a little bit too. Anthony Shaw's new book.
Yes, CPython internals. Oh my goodness.
Which is cool.
Yes. It definitely inspired me in a big way. So I was like, you know what? Why not do this? Why wasn't I doing this 5 years ago? And so I encourage people to just I don't know, go do a thing. Pick something, try that.
So then I think it goes into your one you were talking about before, the fuzzing and testing.
Oh, the fuzzing and testing one. Yeah. Okay. So for this, I recommend that everyone check out the articles for all of them, but for this one particularly, because it's so heavy on the code blocks and the examples. But broadly, he was talking about how, the benefits of property-based testing, because it can help you generate input data you might not have thought of yourself, and it can help you check that the result isn't wrong, even if you don't have the right answer. And just basically he was talking about finding bugs in your understanding rather than just your code. And it's almost like getting user feedback before getting user feedback. But yeah, check the article to see the actual practical code examples that he used to illustrate his point. And I think this particular talk was one that a lot of people were looking forward to.
Yeah, it looks like really good, especially if you're interested in going a little further with testing and taking, in my opinion, testing to that next level, which, the parameterizing or having slightly fuzzier tests that, cover a broader area. So that's good.
Yeah, to kind of cover, kind of get out of the problem where you're like, well, I asked you to do exactly this. Oops, that wasn't exactly what I wanted.
Yeah, making it prepared for human interaction.
Yeah.
nothing,
oops, I'm a human.
Nothing could be completely prepared for it, but yeah.
Yeah.
All right. And then we get into lightning talks.
Yes. So the second round of lightning talks was a little bit of a marathon because there was some spillover from the first day, and maybe also some people hadn't signed up yet. And so we had, a whole bunch of talks. So I may be a little quicker on these, but there was Ronnie Fanschmidt, who's a PyTest maintainer. He talked about, the talk was called Annotated Assertions Debugging with Joy. Basically, he wants to create a PEP or have a PEP sponsor and open PyTest implementation to a wider audience. Then Pablo Galindo and Batuhan Taskaya talked about PEP 657. So that's about error locations and tracebacks. They want to improve debugging by just making tracebacks more specific, which certainly sounds helpful. Could help with code coverage tools because you can get expression level coverage rather than just line level coverage. Oh, and so Luciano, this was one of the talks that ended up tying into everyone's talks because it's, basically it's about usability of Python, which is going to somehow tie into every possible topic at the summit. And he was talking about, are you familiar with the user personas of Mort, Elvis, and Einstein?
I found them fascinating when I just read this, and I was like, yeah, okay, I haven't heard it presented that way. Maybe that's the context that I've been floating in, but yeah, it's cool.
That's fine. But yeah, so basically, if you can sort of sidestep the whole meaning of what these different names kind of have associated with them. Basically, he's presenting the idea, what if we had core users rather than just core developers, also had some kind of role called core users. These are just people who are Python users or not core developers, and they can come in and give feedback as well, just to make sure that we're meeting the needs of the broader community, where it's just where you're not running into the situation like he had with the whole trying to set up Debian and drivers and being I can't, and he's talking to someone who's a lot more experienced and knowledgeable than him. And it's no, this is optimal, this is suboptimal, and it's I can't get it done, and it can be useful to get feedback from people who don't know stuff back to front and don't know why things are the way that they are, and who are going to be bumping into problems that you might not consider, right? So
and then that's part of the language too, is it goes again, you're connecting so many things with this talk. The idea of, what are you interested in? Well, I want to do this because that's what's fascinating to me. And then it's okay, but who's going to use it? Where are they going to use it? And what truly do those users want and need for? Yeah. So.
Yes. Yeah. Because then certain people can end up being kind of, overrepresented. Like certain voices might end up being like heard more. And it's also kind of came up in the documentation talk, because it's like there are certain core developers who like may have contributed documentation and they might feel like ownership for that documentation, but it really is a community resource. And like the core developers are going, like they're core developers because they are core developers, they're going to have different documentation needs than other people are going to have.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about terminology this whole time too, right? And all that stuff. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. Or it's just like GC, garbage collection, got it. Like once you've got it, it's locked. But for the first time you see it, it's like, oh no, this is an obstacle. I have to learn something. Right. And then, every time you see something that confuses you, like it's an opportunity to push through or to give up, right?
Right.
So
yeah, exactly.
Anyway, we can talk about educational writing another time.
Yeah, totally.
Next, Jason R. Coombs talked about annotations as transforms. Basically, he's talking about designating transformation functions to be applied to parameters and return values. He started off talking about decorators, and he was inspired by decorators. He was like, oh, like in theory, we could implement his idea with decorators right away, but then he thought it would be more elegant to use annotations. Read the article, check it out. And because Mark Shannon, so tiers of execution, making CPython execute efficiently, talks about plans for tiers of execution for future versions of Python. Check out the article. I definitely learned a lot by listening and then having to look up everything that he said. It was like, oh, this is what a tier of execution is. Oh, okay. So it's not about like going from one to the other, it's having multiple. And then it's like the hotter the code, the higher the thing. And like, oh, okay, this is fascinating. I feel like I understand a quarter of it. But check out the article and then go down rabbit holes of looking up everything like I did. And I think his slides may be up.
Okay.
I'm not sure. Maybe on his GitHub. I provided links to people's online presences from their name in the articles.
Yeah, I see his GitHub here where he's talking about the tiers.
Okay, good.
And breaking them apart. And yeah, cool.
Fantastic. Yeah, I remember consulting his, like I watched the talk, watched his slides, ended up reading like his own write-up about it. And I was like, okay, I think I am now equipped to write something.
Yeah, get started. Yeah, totally.
Yeah, get started. It sounds fascinating, and I understand a quarter of it, but check it out. Oh, yes, the last one was by Tobias Cohn, running parallel Python code in the browser. It's working on CPython, which is a new Python implementation, works in the browser. He wants to like do multiprocessing in the browser and not block the UI and use native JavaScript libraries. He was another one who had really useful visualizations in his talk, so I tried to bring in a decent number of screenshots. But again, this is one of the lightning talks, so I was trying to split 1,000 words between 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 talks, which was a challenge, and I don't think I succeeded on that. But yeah, it was like all of these talks are fascinating. They cover a wide range of topics, of uses, of demographics, of problems, of solutions.
Yeah.
It is as broad as Python and the Python community.
Yeah, it's cool. Lots of aspects, lots of different points of view and and goals that people have. So
and facets.
Yeah, all these neat facets. Yeah, it's great.
And that was it. Yeah.
I there's a lot of lot to go digest, and so depending on what you're interested in, and again.
Yeah. Pick like a thing, start there, and probably not all of it will be interesting to everybody, which is totally fine.
Right.
But yeah, it was. 2 days of talks. I think they were maybe recording for maybe it was 6th day or something like that. But yeah, I was definitely having some brain mush by the end, just as I absorbed all of these fascinating topics that were becoming less esoteric to me as I learned.
Yeah.
But I was definitely going into these being like, okay, time to have a better understanding of memory leaks than I did before.
Yeah.
Okay.
Totally.
Yeah. It was very, very cool. And I'm glad I got to, share this with people because, the people who did not get to go now get to sort of have gone.
Yeah. I have a couple weekly questions. You up for those?
Ooh, go for it.
Okay. So the first one is, what are you excited about in the world of Python right now?
Well, clearly the editorial board.
Yeah.
That is up there. In terms of projects, I have been wondering if I need to finally circle back and work on like an old RenPy project that I started.
Okay.
Because it feels just like a fun thing to do. Where
Yeah.
I get to,
It's like a visual novel language, right?
yeah, it's a visual. Yeah. I think there was actually a PyCon talk.
Yeah.
On the last one about it. But yeah, it's fun. I was picking around with it before, and it's like I'm really good at starting projects.
Don't have to get me started.
Yeah. But it's a fun type of project. I mean, generally I like games and writing anyway, and so this is a nice
it combines all that.
kind of combines all that.
Cool.
But yeah, I think I might pick that, but I am also far too good at filling my time, so we'll see how that
cool
rolls out. But yeah,
I guess this might be related to that. Then the next one is like, what do you want to learn next?
I haven't actually messed around with any Internet of Things stuff.
Okay.
I've never gotten around to it, and like in terms of whenever a project requires me to actually acquire physical objects, it tends to fall on the back burner. But that is one of the things that has kind of been bubbling in the back of my mind as like a cool thing to actually dip my toe into.
Is there a particular one?
Not really. I remember at PyCascades a few years ago, I saw Sev, I can't remember his last name, but he was giving a talk where he was using Python to determine the humidity of soil.
Yeah. Okay.
That sounded kind of neat. Yeah. So I don't know if I would do that exactly, but I might kind of revisit that talk as a point of inspiration to see what
there you go.
What is inspiring me. But maybe I could somehow use that to like check the humidity in my sprouting containers or something. I don't know.
Yeah. So this is something new I've been doing, which is if you have some final like shout outs that you want to do, or if you want to share your like social connection stuff.
Oh, okay. So, I mean, shout out one of the fantastic, fabulous authors at Real Python, Leodanis, recently published his 30th article, which I think is a fantastic milestone. He's an absolute powerhouse.
Yeah.
So check him out. He has a fantastic series on PyQt. He's fantastic with GUI stuff. And yeah, he's fantastic. In terms of social, I mean, I am on Twitter. I don't tweet tons, but I'm at Jo_Jablonski. So that's JO_JABLONSKI. I do have a site that I have not updated in ages. It's jojab.dev, JOJAB.dev. But yeah.
Cool.
That's it.
Well, thanks for coming on the show again. This has been a lot of fun, and I've learned a lot just in talking about it more. And again, you give me a bunch of different avenues to further my my learnings and things that I want to explore, which is great.
Fantastic. Well, it is a pleasure to be on, and I'm always happy to chat.
All right. Well, hope to talk to you soon.
You take care, Chris. Bye.
All right. Bye. This episode was brought to you by Sentry, helping developers see issues that matter, solve those issues in minutes, and learn insights to keep their applications running at peak performance. You can learn more at sentry.io/4for/Python, or you can click the link in the show notes. I want to thank Joanna Jablonski for coming on the show again. And I want to thank you for listening to the Real Python podcast. Make sure that you click that follow button in your podcast player. And if you see a subscribe button somewhere, remember that the Real Python podcast is free. If you like the show, please leave us a review. You can find show notes with links to all the topics we spoke about inside your podcast player or at realpython.com/podcast. And while you're there, you can leave us a question or a topic idea. I've been your host, Christopher Bailey, and I look forward to talking to you soon.